This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And today, ladies and gentlemen, it is Tuesday, February 25th. And on this Tuesday edition of the show, it's going to be great. It's going to be a pretty good show. I would never lie to y'all. Except for now. I am lying to you. No, I'm just joking. It's going to be a great show. We're talking about the NFL Combine. We're going to be talking about the NHL trade deadline. We're going to be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks clinching a playoff spot already. We'll be talking about a brand new concept for the world of golf. And we will also be talking about, of course, the weekly XFL Power Rankings. And there are big shakeups in the XFL Power Rankings, which we will get into at the end of the show. But I'm just telling you, it's a little controversial if you care about the XFL, which I do. I've been watching it. It's pretty good. Pretty good. As always, if you like this podcast, rate, like, and, of course, subscribe to it. And if you like me, you can follow me at Strickland_Josh. But let's jump into it. So the NFL Combine is starting today. It is the most glorified scouting period. All these young college athletes coming into Indianapolis, Indiana to run far distances and run between cones and do other drills that are football related, maybe. So, what are the big stories of the NFL Combine? That's what you might be asking. What are the big stories of the NFL Combine? And honestly, there's not a lot, to be honest. There's some interesting characters involved. There's 337 players. So, of course, if you have a player from one of your favorite teams, you're going to like watching him, obviously. If you have someone you just like, or your NFL team, if you're a Bengals fan, you're interested in Joe Burrow's performance and stuff like that. If your NFL team needs that draft pick that they need and you are dead set on someone, then it could be important. But to people like me, it's just kind of a bump on the road to try to get people interested in the NFL, even in the off season. Because as you can tell, I mean, you had the CBA talks, you had the CBA talks, and that's pretty much it. That's all you've heard from the NFL since the Super Bowl. After the Super Bowl hype died down and the excitement over the Kansas City Chiefs winning has died down. Now we are in the NFL draft season where hopes are starting to swell up. Hopes for teams such as the Cincinnati Bengals, hopes for teams such as the Carolina Panthers or the Washington Redskins. They're starting to rise up as their next franchise player could be at this combine. More than likely he's at this combine, because I don't think it's ever happened that a top five drafted player has not been at the combine, or at least invited to the combine. But I'm not going to talk about those guys because, honestly, we want to see how they perform and do all that stuff. But honestly, it's kind of not that interesting. I'm going to be talking about the guys that you might not have thought about being interesting, but they are interesting. Now, of course, the first guy I'm talking about is the biggest story of the combine, I feel like. Tua Tagovailoa. Massive hip injury in November, I believe, that put him out for the rest of the season. And It was the same hip injury that Bo Jackson got, so a lot of people were wondering if he's even going to play football ever again. And he came out and he said, I will be at the NFL Combine. I won't be performing any drills or anything like that, but I will be there to conduct interviews with the teams and also make sure my medical's clear. So he mentioned during Super Bowl week that his main focus is to get his medicals in check so teams don't have to worry about that. So that is a big one. His medical report. His fractured hip is fully healed. But where is he in range of motion for his leg and stuff like that? He's also had injury on both ankles. So a full medical report for Tua Tagovailoa is going to be very important for his draft projection. Now, he's projected to be the number 2 or number 3 quarterback taken just because he's that good. But there is that doubt seeping in. Like, is he going to be healthy enough to even play this year? So a lot of teams might pass on him because of that. And we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I mean, teams have done stupider things than I've seen. I think Tua's going to be... I personally think Tua's better than Joe Burrow in this draft. It's just the fact that all of his injury history, his injuries that he's had so far, I mean, you can understand. It's understandable that some NFL teams are not too keen on that. Next up, we have Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards, he's a wide receiver for South Carolina. He was very productive for South Carolina. He was their best receiver for the past 2 years. He had separate knee injuries. He had a knee injury to end his career at South Carolina this past year. He also had a knee injury in high school that ended his career in high school before he moved on to Columbia, South Carolina. He broke his foot last week, I believe. He broke his foot recently training for the NFL Combine and training for the draft. And because of that, he now relies on the medical report, how his foot is healing, how he's doing mentally and stuff like that. He was going to be a top 100 draft pick. And now we're sitting here, we're thinking, like, how far is he going to fall because of this broken foot thing? Because, I mean, it'll be healed by the time the season starts. But some teams, you know, I mean, they're against that. The knee injuries is an issue. I don't like to say injury history because, you know, some injuries are just freak accidents. But, you know, he does have 2 separate knee surgeries that he had done, and then he broke his foot training for the NFL draft. So there are legitimate concerns there. Jacob Eason, quarterback for Washington, his character, and I saw this brought up in an article, his character will be brought up as a question mark. So he was immature in his early days at Georgia, which led him to transfer to Washington. Teams will be looking at his mental makeup to see if he is worth drafting, because, you know, you have to have, nobody wants to make the Johnny Manziel mistake. You don't want to draft someone that is not capable of being mentally mature and capable of making good decisions just in general. So that is a big deal in the NFL. So Jacob Eason, he's going to be under a microscope because of that. Next up, we have Lynn Bowden. It's Bowden. Lynn Bowden, wide receiver at Kentucky. You may know him because he threw a punch at a Virginia Tech player during pregame scuffle at the Belk Bowl during bowl season. So it's another thing, emotional maturity. Is he able to take the NFL? Is he able to compose himself in interviews? And will he convince teams that he is mature enough to play in the NFL and not give them any teams any issues? Because you got to remember, I mean, it's coaches and stuff, and they're mostly interviewing about football knowledge and football IQ and stuff like that. But the mental part is very important. Teams don't want a Antonio Brown type thing going on. They don't want a Martavis Bryant thing. You want a mature guy. You want a guy who paid his dues in college and is mentally mature so he doesn't screw you over during the season. Another name that comes to my mind is Josh Gordon. You need someone who is not able to not necessarily not screw up, but not screw up on a regular basis and get him kicked out of the league or anything like that. And then one of my biggest interests in this draft is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, running back for Wisconsin. The best running back Wisconsin has had he led the country in rushing yards or something like that for 3 years in a row. He had 3,000-yard seasons or something like that, rushing for Wisconsin. He was a reliable back. He played 3 full seasons with Wisconsin. It's going to be interesting to see his 40-yard time. It's going to be interesting to see all of those different tests, because there have been legitimate concerns of whether or not he can translate to the NFL, which I think is absurd, because he's started 3 full years for Wisconsin. He's playing behind a Wisconsin O-line that's basically an NFL offensive line. So Jonathan Taylor is another big thing to look out. I will be looking out for him. So it's just a couple names. Of course, there are 337 players at the NFL Combine right now. So clearly there's a bunch of other people, but these are just a couple names that stood out to me. And so when we return from the break, how can we improve the NFL draft? When we return.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
As I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the NFL Combine is just kind of a stopgap. People are hyped about the draft. People are kind of they're cooling down from the Super Bowl, and it's just a nice valley here. People are excited. You have the Super Bowl, that is this peak. This is the peak of the NFL season. Then you have this huge dip, this huge valley, and then interest spikes up again during the NFL draft, because teams that weren't in the Super Bowl now have hope. They want to know what their team is planning on doing in the future. People want to get a good idea of what's going on with their team and where they're heading for the future. And also people like to put on their GM hats and like pretend they know what is right for their organization now. So of course, for some teams, their fans are usually more correct than the organization, but that's a completely different thing. But to be fair, unless you are actually that interested in watching all these college-age young men run around in tights, tight shirts, tight shorts, and stuff like that, and just watching them run random drills, and there's people that are into that. I understand that. And sometimes it's just kind of a thing to watch, especially since it's on during the day. So usually you can watch it just during the day. But to the casual audience, it is not that interesting. It's not interesting at all. I'm one of those people that I will put it on if there's nothing else to do. Like I'm just bored and there's nothing else to watch except the NFL Combine. I'll watch the 40-yard dashes because those are fun to watch. It's fun to see skill players, how fast they can run. It's actually fun to watch linemen as well, because some linemen are surprisingly really fast and they can run faster than me. I just want everyone to know I ran a 5.0 in high school, so I can't really talk on speed at all. So yeah, I mean, the 40-yard dash is fun to watch. The 3-cone drill is fun to watch. But other than that, most of the drills are very specific to that position group. And unless you know the inner workings of like the technique and stuff like that, most people watching it don't know what's going on. They're just watching the same drill over and over with different players. You don't necessarily know if one person's doing it better than another or something like that. So there are definitely ways to improve the NFL draft. I came around this article by Emory Hunt Emory Hunt. He is a current NFL scout. He's a former NFL player. He came up with 3 ideas to improve that could improve the NFL scouting combine. So we're going to dive into this. I'll give my thoughts. I'll give you the information of what he said, and then I'll give you my thoughts right afterwards. So first off, he said make the players wear pads. Not necessarily full pads, but wear a helmet and shoulder pads as they work through the on-field drills. So apparently the Canadian Football League already does this for their scouting combine. It's interesting because pads change everything for receivers and other pass catchers. It changes things for defensive backs. It helps linemen feel more natural, because if you ever watch the offensive line drills, it looks dumb. Not going to lie, it looks stupid. But if you put them in pads, then it looks a little bit more natural, and the players will probably feel more natural because of that. Receivers won't have the full range of motion that they would have without pads or anything like that, which means it will change how the players adjust to the ball, how they approach to catching the ball. Helmets will also change sight lines and how the receivers view the ball and stuff like that. So this is a valid idea. I actually think this should happen. This should definitely happen, because one thing people complain about the NFL Combine is that it's not football. I mean, yeah, they're doing the drills and stuff like that, but I've seen a lot on Twitter. I don't know if you ever look on Twitter and you see videos of high school recruits, high school players. They go to these special recruiting events where they do like one-on-one drills against each other, but they're not wearing pads. They're literally just there in shorts, a tank top or whatever, and you have a defensive lineman versus an offensive lineman, and it's a blocking drill. And it makes no sense, because neither of them are in pads. There's no rules that I know of. I saw one where it was an offensive lineman. He was getting pretty much destroyed. He pulled like the defensive lineman's shirt over his face, and then he just kind of slammed him into the ground right around where the quarterback would have been. And some people were praising it as a good offensive lineman, and I was like, no, that was bad. But stuff like that, that's stupid to watch. Like, no, there's no lie. Watching these offensive linemen do these offensive line drills, watching D linemen do their D line drills, watching receivers just catch a ball like they're running routes. It's like, yeah, I mean, I can do that. I can run a route. But if you put pads on them, it gives it a more natural feel. It gives it more of a game time feel, and you get a better feel of how they would look, how would they play with pads on. I mean, obviously you have hours upon hours of film to watch of them, especially if you're a scout. But during the combine, I feel like it would be better to have shoulder pads and helmets and stuff like that, just to kind of make it a little bit more realistic, closer to how the actual play of football is like. So I thought that was a good idea. So number 2, eliminate the 40-yard dash. Now this is controversial because, like I said earlier in this segment, 40-yard dash I watch. It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch people go fast. Like that's the bottom line. That's why when the Olympics come around every 4 years, track is always one of the biggest events, because people like to watch people go fast. Like Usain Bolt, everybody loves watching Usain Bolt. Michael Phelps, swimming, people love watching Michael Phelps swim. Now, of course, there's some caveats to that, because NASCAR is not that popular. So people like watching human beings push their limits and go fast. And the 40-yard dash is like that as well. However, running in a straight line doesn't resemble football at all. Very rarely in football would you be running in a straight line. Usually if you're running in a straight line in football, that means speed doesn't matter. You're going to score, or you're going to get hawked down or something like that. Running in a straight line, you'd never run in a straight line. It will also usually show on tape if you are fast or not. The 40-yard dash is 70% speed and 30% technique. Because the majority of the training for the NFL Combine is working on technique for the 40-yard dash. If you see everyone running the 40-yard dash, they all have the same starter block. I mean, it's basically teaching track to these football players. And these football players that have no interest in running track. I mean, some of them might have ran track in high school and stuff like that, or maybe even in college, but they're not here to run track. And I think the 40-yard dash, as fun as it is to watch, it should be eliminated. Game speed is also different from regular speed. You know, there's kind of a switch that pulls on adrenaline and what have you when you're in an actual football game. Some people are faster than it looks like in 40-yard dash. Some people are way slower. Just the adrenaline and the excitement of just playing football changes your speed. So, I mean, I love the 40-yard dash, but this is not a terrible idea. So, number 3, broadcast the player interviews with teams. So this is more for TV ratings. This is more to be interesting to the audience. It will be useful for fans and media. Players can't stick to a script if they all are aired live on television. Now, I think this is an interesting idea. I know this will never happen because most teams don't want people looking into what they ask, especially since most teams ask really stupid things. I don't know if you've heard stories about what NFL teams have asked NFL prospects in the past, but it has been stupid. But in this one, I like it. It could be fun to watch. I don't know if I watch it that much, though, but it could be fun to watch. So that's interesting. So there you go. There are 3 ways to make the NFL Scouting Combine a little bit more exciting. If you have any other ways that you think that can make it more exciting, let me know. And yeah, so that's where we'll stop right there. When we return from the break, we'll talk about the NHL trade deadline.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
The NHL trade deadline was yesterday. It was Monday. And holy cow, the NHL got busy. Like, oh my God, there are so many trades. I can't even cover all of them. I probably could if I tried, but I can't even cover all of them. But I have 4 main ones that I am going to cover in this one. They're more of the interesting ones. But the NHL went crazy. I mean, this year has already been very weird for the NHL, as like 60% of the coaches in the league have been fired. So you have that, and then this trade deadline was just crazy, man. So let's get into it. We're going to start off with the Blackhawks trading goaltender Robin Lehner to the Vegas Golden Knights. So they traded. The Blackhawks are getting a second-round pick and goaltender Malcolm Subban and defenseman prospect Slava Demin. Demin was a teammate of top Hawks prospect Ian Mitchell at the University of Denver, so that could be interesting. So Lehner came to the Blackhawks in the fall. He signed from the Islanders. He left the Islanders, signed with Chicago for a 1-year, $5 million contract. He was a kind of surprise signing in July. He was a Vezina finalist with the Islanders before he left for Chicago. This is actually kind of sad because he said that he would sign a 3-year extension with Chicago. He'd take a pay cut to stay in Chicago. He said he loved it in Chicago, and he said he loved the guys, the young and old, and he wanted to do everything to make it work. But the Blackhawks just decided that it just wasn't a good fit or something like that, I guess. But he's the league leader in goals saved above average. He's kind of had a weird stretch so far. He's been a little off lately, but it happens to goalies. It was his tenure in Chicago was brief. It was memorable, and yeah. So the Blackhawks will be switching over to Crawford, who outplayed Leonard over the past month, posting a .939 save percentage compared to Leonard's .888. So it looks like it was just a situation that the Blackhawks found a goalie that was better than him. He was only signed to 1 year anyways, so they decided to move on. So kind of a sad story there, but that is a big one. Vegas gets a new goalie to help out with Fleury, and Vegas is number one in the Pacific Division with 76 points, and the Blackhawks are last in their division, in the Central Division, with 62, which that division is still, well, never mind. It could not be up for grabs, but there you go. There's that trade. Next up, we have Islanders get Pageau. It cost them big. It cost them a first-round pick in 2020, which moves to 2021 if the Isles end up with a top 3 pick this June, a second-round pick in 20, and a third-round pick in 2022 if the Isles win the Stanley Cup this spring. So they're fighting for either third place in the Metropolitan Division or one of the 2 wildcard spots in the Eastern Conference. They're adding some pop up front. Was key to the Isles staying in the hunt. Pageau, 27, is having a career year with 24 goals and has earned praise for his two-way game, which should make him a good fit for the defense-first Islanders. So, a lot of people, it's a steep price to pay for a rental. A lot of people have agreed. It's a lot of draft picks. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Islanders can actually make the playoffs, especially since they are kind of on the bubble at the moment for the playoffs. Currently, the Islanders are 4th in the Metropolitan. They have 76 points. They're behind the Flyers, who have 77. Then you have the Penguins. The Metropolitan, by the way, is just it's crazy. It's crazy. Every single team except for the New Jersey Devils have 70 or more points. Now, as you remember, when I was talking about the Pacific Division, the Golden Knights are leading with 76. You have the Capitals with 82, you got the Penguins with 80, Flyers with 77, Islanders with 76, and then you have the Hurricanes with 74, Blue Jackets with 74, Rangers with 70. So those spots are up for grabs. These playoff spots are up for grabs. And the Islanders are doing what they need to do. Senators, of course, got a huge haul for Pageau. The Senators are currently 7th in the Atlantic Division. They have no hope of making the playoffs there. So, good move for them. They got a bunch of draft picks. There's a bunch of draft capital. And got rid of Pageau. And Islanders, they got Pageau, but they gave up a whole lot. They are really banking on making the playoffs and maybe re-signing him. He didn't fit the Senators' rebuild. Pageau was asking for 5 years at $5 million. We'll see if the Islanders are willing to pay that up and re-sign him there. So Florida, the Florida Panthers traded off Vincent Trocheck to the Hurricanes for Eric Holla, Lucas Wallmark, E2 Luostrian. Sure, why not? And defenseman Chase Brisky. There's a lot to unpack here. Both Florida and Carolina are grinding it out. and trying to nail down a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. Florida is 4th in the Atlantic Division with 70 points. They're behind the Maple Leafs with 72 and the Tampa Bay Lightning with 85. Then the Hurricanes, as we mentioned, they're in that deadly Metropolitan Division, but they are only they're only 3 behind the Flyers right now. And yeah, so they're both vying for a playoff spot here in the Eastern Conference. Both teams are in need of defensive help, especially a top 4 defender. They traded skilled forwards kind of just for fun. Whatever. It's fine. Florida adds 2 prospects along with everyday players of Lucas Walmart and Aaron Holla, and Vincent Trocheck is looking to be a long-term deal and the kind that a seller makes. Of course, Trocheck will definitely bolster the Canes' top 9, has 2 more years left on his current deal, meaning Carolina will be fine way beyond this year. So, kind of a surprising deal. Kind of surprising. Hurricanes will now... Hurricanes get Trocheck. He's a pretty good player. Panthers kind of iffy about why they did this, but they gained some prospects out of it. And so, yeah, it's kind of an even deal depending on who you talk to. Point pace for Trocheck has been 57, 54, 75, 51, 54. One of those is an outlier, happening at the age of 24. Of course, a year when most forwards peak, and I think that's what most people still think Trocheck is. So yeah, he has a .887 on ice save percentage, which is something Trocheck doesn't really have much control over. But anyways, next up, close to home, Patrick Marleau. Patrick Marleau got traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins from the San Jose Sharks. So the Sharks kind of let him walk away a couple years ago to go to the Maple Leafs, and then he came back during the season this year, signed to a 1-year deal, and now he's getting sent off to the Pittsburgh Penguins to hopefully win a Stanley Cup. This man deserves one so bad. He is Mr. Shark. He deserves it. He deserves a Stanley Cup at some point. So does Joe Thornton, but it looks like they will not trade him as well. So he's a hockey fit. Makes sense. He makes sense with the Penguins. He's cheap. Lost a 3rd-round pick. 2nd-round pick if the Penguins win the Stanley Cup, which, of course, if you win the Stanley Cup, they won't care what pick they gave up. So he'll see spot duty with Crosby and Malkin from time to time. He may even play on power play on occasion. He'll make the second power play better, and he'll make the bottom 6 better. He's no longer a great player, but he's still solid. Most importantly, can still really skate. There's really no downside to this for the Penguins. Good deal. So good deal. And Sidney Crosby will not have to stress over who he's handing the Stanley Cup to if they won. He's going to go directly to Patty Marleau. So when we return, we will talk about the Milwaukee Bucks and how historic this season they're having is and how downplayed it is, too, when we return.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
We just got back from the All-Star break, and people are in the race for the playoffs and stuff like that. And then, of course, I mean, starting to heat up. People are they're battling for the playoffs. You got teams like the Nets, the Magic, the Pacers, Wizards, Bulls potentially as well. Then on the western side, you got Memphis, Dallas, Thunder, Portland, Pelicans. You know, all these teams that are battling for a playoff spot. And then you have the Milwaukee Bucks. Milwaukee Bucks they clinched a playoff spot. They clinched a playoff berth. It is February 25th, and they clinched a playoff berth. They clinched it 2 full days before the really good Golden State Warriors did a couple years ago. So they broke the record for quickest playoff berth in NBA history. The Milwaukee Bucks did. So, and it makes a lot of sense. The Eastern Conference, where while the top four or five teams in the Eastern Conference are really good, talking about Toronto, who's been a surprise this year, but they're also 42-15. The Boston Celtics, then you have Miami Heat and the 76ers. Those teams are really good, but then everyone else in the conference are kind of meh. Pacers are pretty good. After the Pacers, it's a huge drop with the Nets, who are without Kyrie and without KD. The Magic are meh. They're 24-32. Then you have the Wizards, Bulls, Charlotte. Everybody forgets about Charlotte. Detroit, Knicks, the Hawks, and the Cavaliers. So the Eastern Conference is, of course, weaker. Everyone expects that. The Eastern Conference is always weaker. I mean, we always talk about it every year, that the Eastern Conference is always weaker. That's why LeBron always got to waltz into the finals every year. But this year, are we seeing Giannis walk into the finals? The Milwaukee Bucks, they're 48-8. They've only lost 8 times this entire year. They've gone on streaks. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They only have 3 losses so far in this year of our Lord 2020. They're 26-3 home. They're 22-5 away. Yet, why does it feel like nobody talks about them? Is it just because they're Milwaukee? Is it because everybody thinks Giannis is going to leave at the end of this year? What is the reasoning behind Milwaukee not getting any hype? What is the reasoning? There really is not a reasoning. But let's get into it. Let's talk about Milwaukee. So currently they are number 1 in points per game. They're averaging 119.7. They're number 2 in the league in field goal percentage with 48.2. They're number 1 in field goals made. They are number 4 in field goals attempted. Their effective field goal percentage, number 1. 2 points percentage, number 1. 2-pointers made, they're 8th. 2-pointers attempted, they're 23rd. 3-point percentage is 15th. And total rebounds, number 1 by a huge margin. Huge. By that I mean they're number 1 by like 3 rebounds per game, which is incredible. Number 5 in assists per game. Number 18 in steals per game. Number 2 in blocks per game. So yeah, I mean the Bucks are a good team, obviously. Giannis leads the team with 30.1 points per game. Then you have George Hill with 51% 3-point percentage. Then Giannis leads the team with 5.8 assists per game. Then you have Brook Lopez with his leading in blocks. Dante DiVincenzo leading in steals. Giannis Antetokounmpo, of course, leading in rebounds. I mean, they have the best, arguably the best player in the league right now on the team. Arguably, of course. Arguably the best player on the team. And they are destroying people at this moment in time. I mean, they are beating teams down. I have their schedule right here. Let's just look at it. 76ers. 76ers, that's a playoff team. They are a guaranteed playoff team. 119-98, lost. Pistons, not as good. Lost 126-106. Then they played the Pelicans on the 4th of February, 120-108. They lost to the Nuggets, but I mean the Nuggets are a really good team. Let's see. Let's just look at bigger games. Boston Celtics, they won 128-123. See, Dallas Mavericks, they lost to the Dallas Mavericks 120-116, and they beat the Clippers 119-91. They beat the Clippers twice, by the way, 129-124. Lost to the Celtics by a little bit. They beat the Rockets to start the year out, 117-111. I mean, they have been beating down people, and they've already clinched. What do you even do? Of course, they want to clinch the number 1 seed, but what do you even do for the rest of the year? You already clinched the playoffs. They have 30-something games left, something like that. They have just under. They have like 26 games left. If you're on the Milwaukee Bucks, what do you even do at that moment, at that point? And I'm just saying, I mean, it's just crazy that they've already clinched. It's just crazy to me. So let's look into it. Giannis has been playing fantastically. Chris Middleton has also been playing pretty well. I mean, this is just kind of a perfect storm. I didn't even know they have Kyle Korver on their team. Which obviously he has, I mean, he's not as good as he used to be, but Kyle Korver is on the team as well. I mean, he's played in 47 of the games. He's there. I love Kyle Korver, but he's averaging 6 points per game, not too shabby. But yeah, I mean, it seems like this is a team that has everything in place for Giannis to succeed and do his best, which they're going to have to do that, because if they don't, then Giannis can easily leave. He's said that he's mentioned sometimes that he might leave in free agency, which is definitely concerning if you are a Bucks fan, of course, but I think deep down he likes being in Milwaukee, and I mean, every player wants to be in the big market, even though in this day and age with social media and stuff, there's not really such thing as a big market anymore. I mean, of course, you have Los Angeles and New York, and I've discussed this before, especially with my distaste of everybody wants to be in New York conversation. Yeah, you do get more attention. ESPN will give you more attention if you are in these markets. However, you don't have to be in those markets. ESPN gives Giannis all the love he needs. He still gets all the love he needs from ESPN and stuff like that. The internet still realizes that he is a top star. You don't necessarily have to go to LA or go to New York to become a big star anymore. And Giannis, it just doesn't need to happen. But there's some doubt in there. He's kind of planted that seed that he might leave. He's mentioned that he wants to go to LA. It would be cool for him and his brother to meet up in LA and play. Which, can you imagine either of the LA teams getting Giannis? I mean, that would just be completely unfair. That would have to be blocked by the commissioner, but who knows? But you never know. But I think it's just amazing how great the Milwaukee Bucks have been so far this year, and I hope they keep it up. I hope they go. I mean, if they keep it up, I want to see them in the finals. Currently in the finals, you got either the Clippers or the Lakers, or against the Bucks. That's pretty much what you're looking at in the NBA Finals right now, and that's a great matchup. I want to see Giannis in an NBA Finals. I want to see what he does. It's kind of the same as seeing LeBron in the NBA Finals. You want to see LeBron there because you want to see the best player take control of the game, especially in the NBA Finals. And I think Giannis can do that. So when we return, I will be talking about an interesting concept that I saw that could revigorate golfing.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Golf. It's one of those sports where you literally, you're either a huge fan of it or you just don't watch it unless the Masters are on. I'm in that camp. I grew up in the Augusta, Georgia area, so the Masters have I have a personal connection with the Masters. So I enjoy the Masters every time it comes on. I enjoy watching the cool shots, the production values of the Masters in general is just really fun and really beautiful to look at. The course is amazing and stuff like that. But other than that, I'll watch the majors of golf. And but other than that, I will not watch golf. There's just not much. It's an individual. It's kind of the same with tennis. I don't really watch tennis except for the majors. It's just because there's not much. There's nothing to cheer for. You can have your favorite, of course. Everybody cheers for Tiger Woods, which I can get into that later, but, people cheer for Tiger Woods. People have their favorite golfers. But in my opinion, I don't really have any emotional connection to these golfers. I mean, if they win, cool. If I, predicted them to win, or I'm playing, fantasy golf, which fantasy golf used to be a thing. I don't know if that's a thing anymore. I remember playing fantasy golf and being terrible at it. You basically you draft golfers, and then, depending on how they did in the, during the season, during the PGA Tour season, you got points based off it. It was dumb. Anyways, there is a new golf league concept, and I'm sorry if you're getting bombarded with these new concepts every week, but it's interesting to read through these because it's interesting to see what's going on and what kind of ideas could be implemented into the actual leagues. And this is an interesting idea because it pulls ideas from a bunch of different European established leagues like Formula One or the Premier League. So the Premier Golf League, that is what it's called, starting to lift the veil on this new concept for golf. Their CEO is London financier Andrew Gardner. So the league is aimed to launch in January of 2022. So it's nowhere near starting yet. It will feature 48 players competing among 12 four-person teams with 18 no-cut 54-hole tournaments with purses of $10 million each. Events will be played in 4 continents, 10 in the US, 4 in Asia, and 3 in Europe, and 1 in Australia. So basically, there will be teams of 4 golfers, and they will play in tournaments throughout the whole year, which will eventually lead to a playoff or a tournament of some kind to crown a winner, a world champ, if you will. The season will run from January to August. It will not conflict with any of the 4 major championships. Gardner is hoping to achieve collaboration with the PGA Tour and the European Tour. He said, "We want as many people to watch this sport as possible because we believe that there is a connection between the number of people who will watch golf and the number of people who will actually play it. This is in the best interest of the game of golf." Now, of course, to get people interested in this, you're going to have to get big stars. There have been talks with big stars. Big stars, and there's no bigger star in golf than Tiger Woods. He's been in talks with Tiger Woods and other stars deemed vital to the league's existence. Phil Mickelson has said that he was intrigued by this idea. Tiger Woods has said that he and his team are looking into it. They're kind of vetting it out, seeing if it will actually be a thing. Charlie Hoffman said that while as an independent contractor, he'd have to think about it, especially with the high stakes involved. He didn't know if he would like to be owned by some Saudi Arabian money, because one of the investors in the league is Saudi Arabia. Bubba Watson said, it doesn't matter to me. I'm playing on the PGA Tour. So he was kind of against it. Roy McIlroy said, the more I've thought about it, the more I don't like it. The thing as a professional golfer in my position that I value is the fact that I have autonomy and freedom over everything I do. If you go and play this other golf league, you're not going to have that choice, which is that's a fair assessment, because basically what this would turn golf into, a team sport. Kind of like the Premier League, kind of like the NFL and stuff like that, where you would play in 18 tournaments. You have to be at those tournaments with your team. You have to play in these tournaments with your team. It doesn't matter. You have no choice in where the tournaments will be held. You don't have choice in time or anything like that. And I don't know how injuries and stuff like that would work either, but he's got a good point there. You don't really have a choice in anything. The great thing about being a golfer right now is you can kind of pick and choose. Like, of course, you have the majors that every golf player wants to be in, but other than that, you focus on the PGA Tour or the European Tour, and you just play as much or as little as you want, and you go from there. I mean, yeah. So that's a valid thing. You want to be autonomous. You don't want to be stuck to just one simple thing. You don't want to be held down with a schedule that you have to do. But anyways, we'll move on to, because there's some further details about this league. So shotgun starts for each of the first 2 rounds. No dress codes. Stands for team uniforms and colors, so you can match team uniforms and stuff like that. There will be a draft system where teams can draft golfers. There will be a transfer window, sort of like the Premier League. Promotion and relegation, similar to professional soccer. So there's potential for multiple of these leagues being a thing, and teams can play their way up or play their way down, depending on how they performed, of course. And a team principal concept where team captains, playing or non-playing, would select 2 individuals from their team to count each day. So that's similar to how college golf is and how college golf coaches select their lineup. So you basically get to choose, you basically select your best players, and they get to count that day. Their scores get to count that day. So all of this 18 tournament season, it'll lead into a playoff of some sort. So 17 events. There will be 17 events and an individual champion will be crowned, and the teams will be seeded for an 18th and final event in August or something like that. The top seeds would get a bye, and they get to choose their second round opponents. Potentially a bracket or something like that, or a tournament style thing that could lead to a world team champion. And that's all the information that we have at this moment in time. My initial reaction is, that's interesting. Because like I mentioned, one of my issues with golf is that you can cheer for a guy that you like and stuff like that, but there's not really any emotional connection. With this concept, you have people potentially making teams, and these teams, you can cheer for the actual teams instead of the golfers themselves, or you can stick cheering for the golfers and being mad that the teams aren't doing as well as you want them to do. Something like that. It's an interesting concept in theory. I don't know how well it would work in practice. I mean, I think it'd be a lot of fun, especially that world champion, the final event. I think that'd be a lot of fun to watch. It'd basically be like the final day of any major tournament, just every day, pretty much. So it's an interesting concept. I kind of dig it. Really interested in what other people think about this because I haven't really gotten to talk to anybody about this, anybody that actually likes golf and stuff like that. And I think it's a good concept. I mean, the Premier Soccer League, of course, works really well. If they can get at least a fraction, if they can do a fraction as well as that, then this can do really well. I mean, people do like golf. Golf is one of the most popular sports in the world to play. To watch is a different story, but it is considered one of the most popular sports in the world. So it's interesting to see if this can grow and this can flourish. But I do agree with the article here that you need big stars to kind of draw people in. If you get Tiger Woods in it, people are going to watch it. People like watching Tiger Woods for some reason. If you get Phil Mickelson in it, Phil Mickelson, he's got a new rapport, betting on everything now. Rory McIlroy seems keen on not joining, so don't think you're going to get him. But, I mean, you don't need him. He is the number one player in the world at the moment, though, so maybe you do. But if you can get some of these other players in, then it could be an interesting concept for a league. When we return, my weekly XFL Power Rankings. We got some shakeups that I need to talk about when we return.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. We are in week 3 is done. We are done with week 3. We are now heading into week 4 of the XFL season, and the power rankings, you know, happens every year at the beginning of the year. The power rankings for the NFL and stuff like that, they always kind of change a lot, but we're starting to see some solidified. We were starting to see some solidified. We had the same top 3 teams at the end of week 1 and at the end of week 2, but then this week there was a huge shakeup, as there was one team that completely disappointed everyone. Like everyone except for, of course, the team that beat them. But we've had a huge shakeup here. We have a new number one. There was one team, the DC Defenders, they were number 1 both times that I did this power rankings. They were number 1 both times. Now we have a new number 1 as the Defenders fell. Houston Roughnecks are the new number 1. They are 3-0. They beat the Tampa Bay Vipers 34-27. PJ Walker continues to his MVP campaign so far, 24-36 for 306 yards, 3 touchdowns, and that's passing. He had 34 yards rushing for 1 touchdown rushing. He leads the league in passing yards with 748 yards through 3 games. And of course, he can't do it without Cam Phillips. Cam Phillips, 10 targets. He was targeted 10 times, 8 catches for 194 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. This duo was amazing in this game against the Vipers. They were unstoppable. Cam Phillips was getting open all the time, and PJ was just being PJ Walker. Cam Phillips leads the league in receiving yards with 324. Then, of course, you had James Butler with 7 rushes and 72 yards, bolstering that offensive performance by the Houston Roughnecks, and they move on to number 1. Last week they were number 2. They move up to number 1. Their defense kind of struggled a little bit against the Vipers, which I've mentioned before. The Vipers have a pretty good offense, actually. They just can't finish drives, but they finished drives today. They gave up, the Roughnecks gave up 365 yards on 76 plays, so the average yards per play was pretty good, but other than that, meh for the defense. And DeMarquise Gates got a huge interception when the Vipers were driving. But anyways, St. Louis Battlehawks, they also moved up. They're 2-1. Last week they were 3. Now they are 2. They beat the New York Guardians 29-9. Tamu, 12 for 18 for 119 yards. This was a rushing affair for the St. Louis Battlehawks in football's return to St. Louis. This was a rushing affair. Matt Jones had 15 rushes for 95 yards and 1 touchdown. He also leads the league with 224 rushing yards, which, by the way, the leader in rushing yards only has 224 rushing yards. So that tells you a lot about how this league has been going so far. Christine Michael also had 13 rushes for 44 yards and a touchdown. They had 156 rushing yards and 4.2 yards per rush. They were running it down the Guardians' throats. St. Louis also boasts the first kickoff return in the XFL with that new kickoff rule, new kickoff setup with a reverse, which was it was a cool play to watch. Actually, I watched it live. It was really cool to watch, and it was a good play. I mean, it was a good return, good stuff, all that. So St. Louis, they move up to number 2. Now here's the controversial thing I was telling you about at the beginning of the show. Number 3, Dallas Renegades. 2-1. Last week they were 4. Moved up 1 spot. They beat the Seattle Dragons 24-14. Landry Jones, 30 for 41, 274 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He threw 2 interceptions, though. Still kind of rusty. But he's done pretty well the 2 weeks he's played. Cameron Artis-Payne with 13 rushes and 80 yards. Donald Parham had a kind of coming out party here with 5 catches, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Defense wasn't anything special. They gave up 300 yards to the Dragons, 99 rushing, 201 passing. I believe. I mean, they didn't do terrible, but they didn't do anything mind-blowing. They gave up 2 touchdowns to the Seattle and stuff like that. The controversial thing is that I knocked the DC Defenders. The biggest drop in the XFL Power Rankings history, DC Defenders dropped 3 spots to go from number 1 to number 4. And here is why. They lost to the LA Wildcats 39-9. DC was number 1 for 2 weeks, for the first 2 weeks of the season, and now they are down to 4th after a whopping loss to the LA Wildcats. Why is this a big deal? The LA Wildcats were LA Wildcats, first off, got their first win. This is their first win. And in their other games, they didn't look good. They didn't look that good. They fired their defensive coordinator after the first week, after the first game. So the LA Wildcats were looking to spin out of control, but they came in here. Cardell Jones went 13 for 26 for 103 yards and threw 4 interceptions. This was a guy that everybody was hyped up about. They kept spewing the stat that he's undefeated as a starting quarterback, and then he came out and threw 4 interceptions in this game in his first loss as a starting quarterback. Brosette had 8 rushes for 75 yards and a touchdown, but they lost a fumble. They have 5 turnovers total and went 15% on 3rd down. So the DC Defenders, huge fall from grace here this week as they lose to the LA Wildcats. And guess who's number 5? The LA Wildcats. The LA Wildcats really impressed me in this game. They jump from number 7 to number 5. They jump the Guardians and they jumped the Seattle Dragons because their offense went insane. Josh Johnson went 18 for 25 for 278 yards, 3 touchdowns. Trey McBride had 5 catches for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. Neil Spruce had 3 catches for 75 yards. They were 100% in the red zone, had 334 total yards in this game. They had 5 turnovers, as I mentioned, against the former potential MVP candidate. Now the MVP conversation is kind of just PJ Walker at this point because there's no one else near him at this moment in time, especially at the quarterback position, as Cardell had a huge disappointing game against the LA Wildcats. And the LA's defense played well. LA's offense jumped off They didn't play like this at all in the first 2 weeks, so this is kind of out of nowhere. Their offense, Josh Johnson, who's been playing in the NFL since like 2008 or something like that, he exploded in this game. And Trey McBride had, the 5 catches for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. Josh Johnson was throwing some dimes to Trey McBride. So the LA Wildcats jump the Seattle Dragons, who is number 6. The Seattle Dragons, they are 1-2. Last week they were 5. They dropped 1 spot because, of course, they lost to the Dallas Renegades 24-12. Brandon Silvers had a better-ish game, 21-34 for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Prohl had 6 catches for 81 yards, 1 touchdown, and he continues to play very well, and he gave up 271 passing yards. The Seattle Dragons gave up 271 passing yards and held Dallas to 50% in the red zone. So it could have been a lot worse than it was, but Seattle Dragons, they're just kind of moving back and forth between the 5, 6, and 7 slots here in the bottom of the rankings. Here's another thing. I moved Tampa Bay Vipers up to 7. Last week they were 8 because they were 0-2. They looked terrible in their games. I moved them up to 8. They're still 0-3. They lost to the Houston Roughnecks, 34-27. They kept switching between Quentin Flowers and Cornelius. Good old Cornelius. Cornelius got more pass attempts, went 16 for 31, 193 yards and 2 touchdowns, 1 passing, 1 rushing. While Flowers had 4, he went 4 for 6, 51 yards and a rushing touchdown. It looks like Cornelius is going to be the Vipers quarterback for the time being while throwing in Quentin Flowers every once in a while. They just can't seem to figure out their quarterback situation at this moment. Tolliver had 8 catches for 104 yards. They finished drives in this game. Their issue in the first 2 games, I feel like their offense was actually really decent in the first 2 games. They just couldn't finish any drives. And in this game, they went 2 for 3 in the red zone. And, they only lost by a touchdown. They had the ball to at least tie the game or something like that, and Cornelius threw an interception. But defense gave up 417 yards, 7.9 yards per play. They had no turnovers. They had 99 penalty yards. So their defense took a step back in this game. But last place is the New York Guardians. They dropped 2 spots from 6 to 8. They're 1-2. They lost to St. Louis Battlehawks. They have a worse QB situation. They played 3 different quarterbacks in this game. You have McLaurin, who went 8 for 11 with 73 yards and 1 interception. He injured his ribs or something like that. Then you had Marquise Williams, who went 7-15 for 94 yards. And then you had Luis Perez, who was the Birmingham Iron quarterback in the AAF. He went 4 for 5 for 39 yards, and he had the lone touchdown for the New York Guardians. The past 2 weeks, they have scored 9 points and given up 56, as they were shut out last week and they only scored 9 this week. To be fair, they played DC Defenders and St. Louis, formerly 2 of the best teams. DC, this looks a lot worse because of how DC was last week, of what happened to DC. They lost 27-0 to DC last week, and DC got shredded this week. So the Guardians get that last place spot. They easily could jump back up, but their offense has been abysmal, and they really need to figure that out. But there you go, the XFL Power Rankings. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. Rate, like, subscribe us if you really like us. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, @Strickland_Josh. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll see you on Thursday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.